Maybe your biggest problem isn't what happens during the day. Maybe it's who takes control of your mind in the first few minutes after you wake up. Because there are people who open their eyes in the morning, and before they even put their feet on the floor, they're already mentally fighting a battle that hasn't even begun. They pick up their phone. They see a message. They remember a debt. They think about someone who disappointed them. They anticipate a difficult conversation. They remember a problem from yesterday. And within minutes, what should have been a new beginning turns into an emotional continuation of the previous day. The body has just awakened, but the mind is already tired. And maybe you know exactly what that feels like. You sleep, but you don't truly rest inside. You wake up longing for peace, yet immediately hand your attention over to worries, notifications, opinions, demands, and problems you cannot control. Then you begin to believe that you'll be happy when something finally changes, when you have more money, when a certain person changes, when that problem disappears, when life finally becomes easier. But there is an uncomfortable truth that can profoundly change the way you live. If your peace depends on everything around you being okay, you will spend a large part of your life waiting to feel something you could begin building right now. The Stoics realized this nearly 2,000 years ago. And the Christian faith takes this understanding even deeper, because there is a difference between wanting a life without difficulties and developing a mind capable of going through difficulties without losing direction, and a heart capable of trusting God even when it still cannot understand the path. That is exactly what we're going to explore today. 4 simple habits that can make you happier, more peaceful, and emotionally stronger every day. Not because these habits will eliminate your problems, but because they can change the person who faces those problems. And stay with me until the end, because the last habit seems simple, but it can transform the way your mind interprets even difficult days. You'll also receive concrete steps to start applying all of this today. But first, I want to ask you a question. When you wake up in the morning, who usually gets the first few minutes of your mind? God, your purposes, or your problems? Think about that, because the first thing is precisely this. Start your morning without feeding negativity. That doesn't mean pretending your problems don't exist. It means not allowing them to be the first voice that defines who you will be that day. Marcus Aurelius understood this battle deeply. As a Roman emperor, he didn't wake up to a comfortable, conflict-free existence. There were wars, diseases, political responsibilities, betrayals, and personal losses. Even so, in his reflections, he constantly prepared his own mind for what he might encounter. This is a profoundly Stoic idea. You may not control what comes your way today, but you can work on how you receive it. And here, faith adds something essential. A Christian doesn't begin the day merely trying to control their own thoughts. They can begin by remembering that they don't have to carry alone what hasn't even happened yet. Jesus taught in Matthew 6:34 not to live tomorrow's anxiety in advance, because each day already has enough challenges of its own. Notice how profound that is. How many times have you suffered at 7 in the morning over something that might not even happen at 3 in the afternoon? How many conversations have you argued through inside your own head? How many bad scenarios have you created? How many times has your body remained safe while your mind reacted as though a tragedy were already happening? Psychology calls part of this process rumination. When the mind repeatedly returns to worries, mistakes, and negative situations without necessarily, and here is the danger, what you repeat mentally begins to occupy your day emotionally. That's why protecting your morning isn't some small productivity technique. It's a way of protecting your attention. Imagine 2 people waking up facing the same problem. The first immediately opens their phone. They find bad news, go on social media, see other people's seemingly perfect lives, remember their own difficulties, and begin the day feeling like they're already behind. The second person has problems too, but they remain silent for a few minutes. They breathe, they pray, they give thanks for being alive. They remind themselves of what they can control and surrender to God what they cannot. Both people's problems may be exactly the same, but they will not enter the day with the same inner state. And this is where everything begins to change. You don't need to control the world before breakfast. You just need to avoid handing the world immediate control of your mind. Try something very simple tomorrow. For the first few minutes after waking up, don't immediately check your notifications. Sit quietly for a few moments. Breathe slowly. Say a short prayer and ask, what is truly my responsibility today? Then ask a second question, what am I trying to control that I need to surrender to God? That combination is powerful. Stoicism establishes a boundary for the mind. Faith establishes a place to put what lies beyond that boundary. One teaches, do well what depends on you. The other reminds you, you don't have to take God's place by trying to control what does not depend on you. But there is another silent problem. Even when we begin to change, we often remain unhappy because we dismiss every small step forward. You improve, but think you should have improved more. You manage to remain calm in one situation, but only remember the others where you lost your patience. You win one inner battle and immediately create another goal. And so happiness always remains a few miles ahead. And that brings us to the second thing. Learn to recognize small victories, because maybe you're making far more progress than you realize. Maybe getting out of bed during a difficult season was a victory. Maybe not impulsively responding to that message was a victory. Maybe beginning to pray again was a victory. Maybe saying no to something that was destroying your peace was a victory. Do not dismiss the small signs of transformation. A life rarely changes in a single extraordinary moment. It changes when small, right decisions begin to repeat themselves. But there is an even deeper reason why so many people fail to see these small victories. And when you understand that reason, you'll realize that perhaps you've conditioned your happiness on a finish line that keeps moving farther away every time you get close to it. The second thing is to learn to recognize small victories. There is an emotional trap that causes many people to move forward in life without ever feeling like they're moving forward. They constantly move the finish line. They achieve something they wanted, and just a few minutes later, their mind is already asking, now what is still missing? You improve financially, but find someone earning more. You start taking care of your health, but look at someone who is years ahead of you. You develop discipline, but blame yourself for the day you failed. You begin rebuilding your spiritual life, but believe you should be much closer to God. And then something dangerous happens. You turn growth into inadequacy. Seneca understood that a person can possess a great deal and still live in inner poverty when they are constantly focused on what they lack. The Bible offers a complementary direction. In Philippians 4, Paul talks about learning to live both in abundance and in need. This matters because contentment does not mean a lack of ambition. It means you don't have to hate where you are in order to keep moving toward where you want to be. But perhaps this will become clearer through a story. Imagine a man named Daniel. Daniel was 38 years old, and from the outside, his life seemed relatively normal. He worked, paid his bills, had a family that loved him, and still carried a few dreams. But there was a battle no one could see. Daniel woke up almost every day, feeling like he was behind in his own life. When he opened social media, he saw former classmates buying homes, traveling, building businesses, and celebrating achievements. Then he looked at himself, and everything seemed small. A few years earlier, Daniel had tried to start a business. It didn't work out. He lost money, accumulated debt, and worse than that, began to lose confidence in himself. After that experience, every small failure seemed to confirm a silent phrase, "Maybe I'm simply not capable." He began comparing himself. Then he began complaining, and slowly he stopped noticing everything that was still working. His wife noticed. One evening, after a particularly difficult day, Daniel came home irritated. He sat at the table, opened a few bills, and said, "I'm tired of getting nowhere." His wife remained silent for a few seconds. Then she replied, "Do you really believe you haven't made any progress?" Daniel looked at her, confused. She continued, "A year ago, you couldn't even look at these bills without panicking. Today, you're paying them off one by one. You went back to work. You're sleeping better. You started going to church again. You're more present with the kids. Maybe your life still isn't where you want it to be, but you're not where you used to be anymore." Daniel didn't respond, but that sentence stayed with him, and that was the moment something began to change. That night, before going to bed, he picked up a small notebook. Instead of writing down everything that was still wrong, he wrote 3 things he had managed to do that day. Nothing extraordinary. "I didn't lose my patience when something went wrong. I paid off another part of the debt. I played with my son for 20 minutes without looking at my phone." He looked at those 3 sentences, and for the first time in a long time, he realized something. His life wasn't standing still. It was quietly being rebuilt, but the real lesson was still to come. Over the following weeks, Daniel continued that habit. He didn't start ignoring his problems. The debt still existed. Work was still difficult. Some days were still emotionally heavy, but now he was training his attention to recognize not only what was missing, but also what was being built. Little by little, he recovered something he had lost even before the money: hope. And then he realized that for years he had been making a mistake. He believed he needed to achieve one great victory in order to believe in himself again, when in reality he needed to recognize the small victories in order to have the strength to keep moving toward the big one. This shift has an important psychological logic. Our behavior is reinforced when we can see progress. When a person sees concrete evidence that their actions are producing change, it becomes easier to keep repeating what works. So don't wait until you've completely transformed your life to recognize that you're changing. Maybe today's victory is simply not giving up. Maybe it's controlling a reaction that used to control you. Maybe it's keeping a small promise you made to yourself. Maybe it's talking to God again after months of distance. Do not despise small beginnings, because what seems insignificant today may be quietly shaping the person you asked God to help you become. But there was a third thing Daniel still needed to learn. Because you can protect your morning, you can recognize your progress, you can try to strengthen your thoughts. But if you spend every day immersed in an environment that feeds cynicism, comparison, complaining, and discouragement, your peace will continue to be attacked. The third thing is to choose your environment carefully. And that doesn't mean abandoning everyone who thinks differently from you. It means understanding that what you repeatedly expose yourself to gradually begins to influence what you consider normal. Epictetus warned about the influence of company and how easily we absorb the habits and attitudes of those around us. Think about your own life. After spending an hour with certain people, do you feel lighter or heavier, more hopeful or more cynical, more disciplined or more willing to abandon your goals? And environment doesn't just mean people. Today, your environment also fits inside your pocket. It's the videos you watch, the accounts you follow, the conversations you feed, the news you repeatedly consume, the voices you grant daily access to your mind. Daniel began to notice this too. Every day at lunch, he sat with co-workers who spent nearly an hour complaining about work, about marriage, about money, about the boss, about life. At first, he just listened. Then he began to participate, and after a while, he realized he was bringing that same atmosphere home. That was when he understood. Not all the negativity he carried had originated within him. Some of it was being absorbed, but that raised an even more difficult question, because protecting his peace would not only mean choosing more carefully what entered his mind, it would mean deciding what kind of presence he himself would be in other people's lives. And that discovery would prepare Daniel for the deepest habit of all, the one that happens when the day ends, the noise dies down, and you're left alone with your own thoughts. The third thing is to choose your environment carefully, because there is a truth many people only realize after years. You may be trying to build peace within yourself while feeding every day the very things that destroy that peace. Daniel began to notice it in the little things. He noticed that some conversations didn't end when people left. They continued inside him. A criticism remained in his mind for hours. A complaint he heard at lunch resurfaced at night. A comparison he saw on his phone silently changed the way he viewed his own life. And then he understood something important. Protecting your mind also means choosing what is allowed to remain in it. That doesn't mean living in a bubble, nor does it mean running away from every negative person. Jesus never taught emotional isolation. On the contrary, he drew near to people who were hurting, confused, and imperfect. But there is a huge difference between loving someone and allowing that person to determine your inner state. The Stoics understood this influence. Epictetus taught that we should carefully observe the company we keep, because habits, judgments, and behaviors can be absorbed almost without us noticing. Modern psychology helps us understand why. Human beings are deeply social. We observe behaviors, interpret emotions, and adjust our own responses to our environment. That's why one conversation can renew your hope, and another can make you question everything. Maybe there is someone in your life who, whenever you share a dream, immediately gives you 10 reasons why it won't work. Maybe there is a group where complaining has become the main form of connection. Or perhaps the most harmful environment isn't even physical. Maybe it's on the screen you hold every day. You wake up and see comparison. At lunch, you consume outrage. At night, you absorb news, conflicts, edited lives, and the opinions of people you don't even know. Then you wonder why your mind can't be quiet. But here is the deeper point. What you repeatedly consume plays a part in shaping the person you are becoming. So Daniel made a decision. He didn't abandon his co-workers. He didn't start judging them. He didn't try to appear spiritually superior. He simply stopped feeding certain conversations. When the complaining began, sometimes he remained silent. Other times, he changed the subject. And on certain days, he preferred to take a short walk alone during lunch. He also reduced his time on social media, and he began using some of that space to read, reflect, and pray. Nothing changed dramatically overnight, but a few weeks later, he noticed something surprising. There was less noise inside him, and that was when everything began to make sense. Daniel had spent a long time asking God for peace, while keeping several doors open through which restlessness entered every day. Maybe you're doing something similar. You ask for clarity, but feed confusion. You ask for contentment, but practice comparison. You ask for tranquility, but begin and end your day immersed in stimulation. You ask for strength to change, but remain surrounded by the same influences that reinforce the version of yourself you want to leave behind. This is not condemnation. It's an invitation to notice, because when you notice, you can begin to choose. And there is something deeply Christian about that responsibility. Proverbs 4:23 teaches us to guard our hearts, because from them flow the springs of life. Guarding your heart doesn't mean hardening it. It means recognizing that not every voice deserves authority within you. This is where Stoicism and faith meet in a powerful way. Stoicism asks, what judgment are you allowing to govern your mind? Faith asks, on whose voice are you grounding your identity and hope? Stoicism helps you establish boundaries around what influences your thoughts. Faith reminds you that your peace doesn't need to be grounded in people's approval, but in something greater than them. One explains the mind, the other reveals purpose. And when these two insights work together, you begin to understand that peace is not passivity. Peace requires choices. Sometimes it requires turning off the screen. Sometimes it requires ending a conversation. Sometimes it requires no longer explaining your dreams to people who always ridicule them. And sometimes it requires staying close to someone difficult without allowing that person's bitterness to become your own. But there is still a fourth thing, perhaps the quietest of all. End each day with gratitude and reflection. Because it's not enough to decide how you begin your morning. What you teach your mind to look for when the day ends also matters. Many people lie down and involuntarily take inventory of their failures. The conversation that went wrong, the money that was missing, the task they didn't finish, the person who didn't respond, the decision they regretted, and then they closed their eyes carrying the impression that the entire day was bad. But was it? Or did your mind simply select the painful parts and ignore everything else? Gratitude doesn't mean denying suffering. That needs to be clear. You can be grateful and still be sad. You can trust God and still not understand what is happening. You can recognize a blessing and still be going through a loss. Gratitude doesn't say, "My life has no problems." It says, "My problems are not my whole life." The Stoics practiced daily reflection. Seneca described the habit of examining his own day, observing his actions and what he could improve. For a Christian, that reflection can go even deeper, because the end of the day can stop being merely an evaluation of your own performance and become an honest encounter with God. Lord, where did I do well today? Where do I need to grow? What am I carrying that I should surrender to you? What can I be grateful for even on this day? Imagine doing that every night, not to create a religious obligation, but to keep anxiety from being the last voice you hear before you sleep. Daniel began doing exactly that. In the same notebook where he recorded small victories, he began writing down 3 things every night. 1 thing he was grateful for, 1 thing he had learned, and 1 thing he needed to surrender to God. One night, after a particularly difficult day, he stared at the page. Nothing seemed worthy of gratitude. He had received bad news at work. An unexpected expense had come up, and he had argued with his wife. Daniel almost closed the notebook, but there was something he still hadn't noticed. That same evening, his son had walked into the room, wrapped his arms around his neck and said, "Good night, Dad, I love you." Daniel stood still. Then he wrote just 1 sentence. "Today was hard, but I was loved in the middle of a hard day." And that sentence revealed something greater. Maybe happiness was never about having a life where nothing goes wrong. Maybe part of true happiness is developing eyes capable of finding what is still good, even when something hurts. And now we have reached the decisive point, because knowing these 4 habits still doesn't transform a life. You need to know how to put them into practice when tomorrow comes, the phone rings, the worry returns, and the old version of your mind tries to take control again. That is exactly where real transformation begins. Real transformation begins when what you understood stops being just an idea and becomes a daily choice. Because tomorrow, you may wake up and feel the same anxiety again. The problem may still be waiting for you. That person may not have changed. The bills will still exist. Your job will still demand a lot from you. And there will be days when you do everything right, and even then, something will go wrong. That is exactly why your happiness cannot depend on a perfect day. After everything Daniel learned, he realized he needed to turn those discoveries into simple practices. Not an impossible routine to maintain, but small decisions capable of reorganizing his mind and heart, and you can begin the same way. First action. Protect the first few minutes of your morning. Before giving your attention to your phone, give a few minutes to silence, prayer, and setting the direction for your day. Why does this work? Because whatever receives your attention first can set the emotional tone for the hours that follow. If you begin by reacting to notifications, problems, and comparisons, you enter the day responding to the world. But when you begin intentionally, you create space between what happens and how you choose to respond. Tomorrow, try spending the first 10 minutes without social media. Breathe. Say a simple prayer. God, give me wisdom to take care of what depends on me and trust to surrender to you what I cannot control. Then choose one single action that will depend on you that day. Maybe it will be remaining calm during a conversation. Maybe finishing an important task. Maybe simply refusing to feed a worry about something that hasn't even happened yet. You don't have to conquer the entire week tomorrow morning. You just need to take responsibility for the next step. Second action. Record evidence of progress. At the end of the day, write down one small victory. Why does this work? Because a mind accustomed to seeing only what is missing will continue producing a sense of inadequacy even while your life is improving. So record simple things. Today I controlled my reaction. Today I did what I promised. Today I didn't go back to a habit that was destroying me. Today I prayed even though I didn't feel like it. Today I kept going. There are days when simply continuing is already a victory. Third action, audit your environment. Ask yourself, what is entering my mind every day and stealing the peace I say I want? Maybe it's a person, maybe it's a page you follow, maybe it's too much news, maybe it's comparison, maybe it's conversations based entirely on complaining. Choose one source of noise and reduce your exposure to it for the next 7 days. Why? Because mental discipline doesn't only mean choosing better thoughts. It also means stopping the constant feeding of what you'll later have to fight against. And there is a fourth practice that ties all the others together. End the day with gratitude, examination, and surrender. Before going to sleep, ask 3 questions. What was good today? What did this day teach me? What am I trying to carry into tomorrow that I should surrender to God right now? Marcus Aurelius examined his own mind. Seneca reflected on his actions. But the Christian faith adds something even deeper. You don't have to finish that examination alone. You can end the day before God. And perhaps this is exactly where the greatest reflection from everything we've seen lies. Maybe for a long time you've believed that you would find peace when your life finally became easier, when the problems decreased, when people changed, when there was enough money, when the anxiety disappeared, when you finally had control over what now seems uncertain. But maybe that is precisely the trap, because if you wait for the world to become quiet before finding peace, you may spend your entire life waiting. Real change begins when you learn to protect your mind, even in a noisy world. When you recognize small victories, instead of living focused only on what is still missing. When you choose more carefully what you allow into your heart. When you end a difficult day and can still find a reason to be grateful. And most importantly, when you understand that there are things that belong to your responsibility and others that need to be placed in God's hands. This may be the most important point in this entire video. You don't need to control everything to live in peace. Do with discipline what is in your hands, and have enough faith to surrender to God what never was. So I want to propose a challenge. For the next 7 days, choose at least one of these 4 habits and consciously practice it every day. And if you fail at one of them, don't turn one failure into a reason to abandon the path. Start again. Discipline doesn't mean never falling. It means shortening the time between falling and deciding to get back up again. Now, before we finish, think about what you're carrying right now. Maybe it's a worry, a person, a financial situation, a decision, a fear about the future, something that occupies your mind every day. And I don't want you to simply write "great video" in the comments. I want to invite you to turn your comment into a decision. If you've decided to do what is within your reach and stop trying to control what is beyond you, write, "I will do my part and surrender to God what I cannot control." And then complete this sentence. The first thing I'm going to change is, maybe it's protecting your morning, maybe it's recognizing your small victories, maybe it's being more selective about what enters your mind, maybe it's ending your days with gratitude. Maybe it's simply trusting again. I want to read your response. And maybe someone who finds your comment will realize that they're not alone in facing the same battle. If this message brought clarity to what you're going through, like this video, that small gesture helps this reflection reach other people who are also trying to find peace in the middle of the noise. And if you want to keep learning how to bring together Stoic wisdom, emotional discipline, and a deeper faith in God, subscribe to the channel and continue this journey with us. Because Stoicism can teach you to govern your mind better, and faith can teach you to trust when you reach the limit of what you can control. So tomorrow, When your eyes open and the world once again tries to compete for the first thoughts of your day, remember, protect your morning, recognize your progress, choose your influences, end your day with gratitude, do what depends on you, surrender to God what does not. And maybe, little by little, you'll discover that the peace you were waiting to find when your life changed began to appear when the one who changed was you.